I see that there are a bunch of people here already. So if you're here, if you want to comment, say hello, let us know where you're from. If there's any like burning questions you want to make sure we get to, go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll just moderate and support each other in tossing out questions as we see them roll up. So I'm sure more people will come on soon too. I want to welcome everyone who's here and I want to thank you, Carla, for being willing to do this. I know we've talked back and forth just about being able to support the therapy community, and I'm grateful that you're
Yeah.
here along with Megan, Jenny, other people saying hello in the chat.
Yes, thanks for having me. I'm so excited. I think this is a topic that can get very complicated, can feel daunting. People
Yeah,
might feel embarrassed or ashamed of their situation, even though, maybe they didn't ever get an education around this subject matter. And I think it's important for us to share the knowledge so everybody can feel empowered
yeah.
by the numbers instead of shy away from it or let it get in their way of success, right? Because we want them all to be successful. So thank you for having me here.
Absolutely. I agree. And I think it's so funny. Like, I joke all the time, I'm a therapist, I can't do math. And I think that's like pretty universal. I don't want to speak for all of us, but like that, in the humanities, math is not our strong suit. And I will just share, like, from the start, you and I met, was it a year ago, 2 years ago?
Yeah,
I think it
about
was
a year ago.
a
Yeah.
year ago, and we did that like deep dive into my financials, and I walked away feeling really clear and confident and knowing exactly what I needed to do. And I just want to, before we even start, report back on I'm hitting those goals, I'm meeting the metrics that we set out. And it was knowing my numbers and being able to talk to somebody who was not only going to like give me the numbers, but help me figure out the story behind them and what to do with them.
Yeah, I love it. You have such a strong team and systems in place, and it just needed like that last missing piece, right? Of like the
Yes.
number understanding that going through it together, making sure we took the time to answer your questions, that you felt in control of them. And now you could go with clarity on to the next year, knowing your numbers, knowing your goals, so that you can go ahead and stay on track to hitting that. And if you weren't, then you could make adjustments accordingly. But we had some built great systems around it that I think made it a lot easier. And so I'm excited to hear that because I also think we hear this about therapists a lot, right? I can't do math or I'm not good with numbers. I don't really get it. And we're like, oh, we speak therapists and,
You
and we
do.
can help you understand the
Yeah.
number side in a simple way that makes it attainable and tangible so that you could start to feel better about that situation overall.
Absolutely. Okay, cool. So, and the reason that we're coming together is to talk salary. So, I really wanted to start us
Yes.
off just by sharing why I chose to go to a salary and also why Carla is here, because you'll hear me say again and again, and I teach a group practice program called Stabilize and Scale, and I'll say this is the way that I do it, but it might not be the way you have to do it based on your numbers, your financials, your data. So, Carla's going to bring in that piece of like how to help you figure it out for yourself. But I remember I probably like 2 years ago, I'm again terrible with timelines as well. I was on vacation in Virginia Beach. I did payroll like from one of the bedrooms in the house that we were staying in. And I was like, okay, done. Now I can go walk on the beach, enjoy my vacation. And I got a text from one of my employees that was like, hey, payroll was messed up for me. Like you didn't pay
Oh.
me the right amount. And at that time, we were doing commission. And I was
Mm,
like, why does this
yeah.
keep happening? Why is it that I'm calculating numbers, I'm using spreadsheets, and for
Mhm.
some reason, like once a month, I'm doing somebody's payroll wrong? And I felt a lot of shame and frustration around that experience of like, obviously, it doesn't feel good when you get that kind of
Mhm.
message. So that there
Mhm.
has to be a better way. There has to be a way that I can do this where it's not taking me 2, 3 hours to crunch numbers,
Mhm.
and then they're coming up
Mhm.
wrong anyway.
Yes.
And that's when I really made the decision to shift to a salary-based model. There are so many benefits that have come with that for me, and I'll talk about them as we go throughout this
Mhm.
chat today. But since that point, we have transitioned to salary. As we move along, I'll tell some stories about how it was received, the good and the bad, the ugly, some of it
Yes,
ugly.
yes, as always.
But now every other week I run payroll. I think it takes me 4 minutes. Really, I go through because everyone's on salary, it's done. Sometimes I have to
Mhm.
approve some PTO and it's bloop, bloop, bloop,
Sure.
and then I'm done. My life feels so much easier. There's no more payroll mistakes. It just feels overall good. And so that's like my starting point for why I like being on salary and why I talk about it with other therapists. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Carla?
Yeah, I think it can be a great model. We'll get into, the things to watch out for, of course, right? Because I think there's also things you have to put in place in order to make
Mhm.
this viable. But what you said about the story, being on vacation and having to run payroll and getting it wrong, like, first of all, a lot of people get it wrong, just so you know, like you just because you're the owner doesn't mean you know everything or can do everything perfectly. Even payroll providers out there sometimes get payroll wrong. And that is the worst problem to have, right? Because you have employees and their pay and it's so sensitive. And we want to make sure we get it right as much as we possibly can. But with that being said, I think employees need and feel a sense of stability, and they feel like you're invested in them if you
Yeah.
can provide them a steady paycheck that they can count on and budget their own personal life on. And so it has its advantages in the sense that the employee feels, well, I don't know how much I'm going to get paid this month, this week, that the commission split just always changes. And if there's a delay with insurance, then all of a sudden they're getting a pay decrease for that given week until we collect. So there's a lot of other pieces to manage when you don't have the stability that I think employees are looking for. So this model really addresses that aspect of it, which makes them more committed to your practice and gives them ultimately a path for growth eventually, with career development that you might be able to provide them by putting them on this first step of like, okay, I'm committed to you. Here's your salary. Now here are my expectations. And we'll get more into that as we go
And
through.
the accountability too. But I love what you said about just the stability of it. So that was what we were coming out of the pandemic and we were burnout. And that like the idea of the hustle culture was very much, I mean, I like to hustle. It is part of who I am, but not everyone on my team does. And that's why they're not
No.
working for themselves and they're working for me. And so there was this element of being able to legitimize my business with a salary and benefits in a way that attracted people that wanted to work for me and wanted that level of stability. Now, I know for me, I had been tracking data already and I knew what my numbers were that I needed to hit with a salary. But that's my first like math question for you is for all the therapists that are here, what is it that they should be looking for in terms of their financials to know whether or not salary is even viable for them to consider?
Yeah, so first we'll start with we got to understand what are our revenue goals for the practice. And maybe we start bottom up instead, because I think people go, okay, I want to hit 1 million or 5 million, whatever their number is, right? But they have no how behind it. And this is a lot of the work that we do is the how are you going to hit this pie in the sky number, maybe it feels like to you right now, right? Or even like a 20% growth year over year. They're like, I'm not sure. I just kind of randomly picked a number and I have no plan. And
Yeah.
this is where everybody falls short from their goals is because there is no plan action step that tells you, okay, here's how we're going to get to that. So we start mapping out. If you already have a team, you already have existing costs. So there's not much you can do about that unless you're willing to revisit compensation structure and strategies around it, which is a lot of what we did, Katie, right? It's like we had people on this payment method. We were going to change them to this. We walked through the communication plan, the structure, why was it beneficial, maybe some of the downfall of it too, because we knew some people weren't going to be happy about it and how we were going to manage that. And then we walked through the plan. Okay, what are our costs that will now be X, right? So maybe they were Y before, now they're X. And then we start to map out, okay, the company needs to be able to hit a certain revenue goal in order to sustain this cost that we're carrying around payroll. So then we mapped out what are by clinician the number of sessions we need as a goal, and then making sure that they can hit that is such an important aspect. And I can't emphasize that enough because what happens is we set a goal of 25, but your team is always hitting 22, or maybe they're hitting 20 on those holiday weeks, right? Because we know those are hard. And they're never averaging out to the 25 because they never aim to hit higher than. And I'm just using that number randomly as an example,
Generally.
but you pick your number. It could be 15, it could be 10, whatever the number is. And also that number has to make financial sense too, of course.
Yes.
But the problem is every time they fall short, every week they don't hit their goal, that's where your profit leak is happening. And because you've committed to a certain cost and you're paying them on this salary model, you have to have them hit the goal. And so we start mapping this out by clinician, where we look at the margins by clinician because we need to understand what is the profitability by each person. And I know this is where sometimes I lose some of our audience or therapists because they're like, well, we're here to make an impact and we want to help our people and we want to take care of our employees. And we're like, yes to all those things, but you cannot have impact if you don't have profit because you will not be around to have the impact you want to have. And you won't be able to have a bigger impact if you can't support and sustain the cost of the business. In order to stay in business, you have to have profit. And this is where we marry the two, right? The impact you guys want to have and the profitability we want to see in the business to make sure that one, everybody's getting paid, including the owner, because you're also another line item, and that you have your overhead under control, because assuming, you have an office building you're renting or you bought that you're paying a mortgage on, and you have admin staff and clinical staff and intake staff, having the right cost structure on the fixed cost side overhead is going to be critical too. So there's a lot of components that go together, but with this comprehensive financial plan, we're looking at every aspect of that to make sure that it all works together in harmony, and that ultimately we're hitting our profit percentage target that we want to achieve.
So I want to back it up a little bit because you've given a lot of great information. And also I want to highlight, I think that my audience and the people that are here are not the impact only audience. They are the,
Oh,
yes, we
good.
want to make an impact
Yes,
and we want
and
to be well compensated for it. And so I have a lot of trust
great.
in our audience being right here with us in that sentiment. And so two of the things that really stand out for me from the practice owner side of what you're saying is like, yes, I have revenue goals, but I also have profit margin goals, which I think are even more important than those random
Mhm.
revenue goals that
Oh,
we all try. We all try and match what everyone else is saying in the exchange membership, and we all want to do the same thing. No, I just want my profits to be good. I want to, whatever, take care of my family and hit the goals that I have. However, the
yes.
two things that I have to look at as a practice owner and what you all should be looking at if you're considering salary is number one, do you have a steady flow of new clients coming in? So when Carla's
Mhm.
saying like all of your employees, for us, it's 20 is full time. All of your employees
Yes.
need to hit 20 hours per week. Well, that's great. You have that number. You know financially what's going to make sense. But are you as a practice getting new clients in to sustain that 20 hours full
Mhm.
time for all of the employees that you have? Because the
Mhm.
accountability piece comes after that. Like, are you holding your team
Correct.
accountable to hit their number? But if you can't give them the clients, then it's really hard to hold them accountable because you're not giving them
Exactly.
the tools, resources, clients that they need in order to do the job you're expecting them to do.
Mhm. Yeah, that is so key. And I'm so glad you touched on the leading part of this, because I think we often forget and then we hold our team accountable to goals that are impossible and completely unattainable if you do not have the number of active clients needed to fill their plate. And so we have to be cautious too, as you're growing in skill and adding clinicians, that you also have the right marketing budget allocation to generate the leads necessary to fill up their plate, especially in the first 3 months as they're getting up to speed on their caseload if they're not bringing one with them. And so it's important that you do provide them enough active clients. And remember, there's churn, there's like retention, metrics you're looking at. So, we might not be keeping every single client we bring on either. And like they might be at the tail end of their treatment plan, and then we need new ones to fill. So it's a constant needing to replenish and keeping an eye on those metrics to make sure your team has just the right amount of clients. And that might be beyond the 20 sessions they have to see, right? It might be 40 clients because you're seeing them bi-weekly and you need at least 20 per week. So like you kind of have to do the math and then make sure you have the right amount. And not sometimes you want to overshoot it because there's cancellations, there's rescheduling, things happen, life happens, right? People get sick and stuff comes up. So making sure you give room for that. That's why we asked that the team aims for a little bit higher than the goal, because we know availability is important. Number of leads brought into the practice is important. That needs to match. And making sure that clinician has the ability to hit that goal by being flexible and available during the busiest time so that we can easily schedule them. And this is where the intake team comes into play to match the need with the filling of the spots available too.
So I want to be specific about what I do based on what you're sharing. So what I know, and I can do the math not in my head, but what I know is that we get maybe 12 new client inquiries per week, and my intake coordinator can convert 60% of them, whatever that
Right.
number is. I also know on the clinician end of things, we expect 20 client hours per week. We expect that they overbook by at least two to account for our cancellation rate, which we know is around 15%. And we know that the churn rate is like average 2-3%. So we know how long someone stays. And therefore, we know how many new clients we need to be pumping in to make up for the clients that are finishing up their treatment. So I have
Mhm.
formulas for all of those things. If you're on here, message me on Instagram at Katie K. May, and I'll give you my formulas because I don't have them top of mind right now. But those are the kinds of things that you want to be figuring out to make sure that you're hitting the right numbers to start someone on salary. I want to talk about my transition to salary and what that was like. But I do have one more question for you before we go there, Carla, because I've heard clinicians say to me, oh, I'd love to be on salary, but I don't have 3 months of all my expenses saved, or I don't have 6 months of all of my expenses saved. I mean, I probably have that now, but I didn't have that when I started. I just had trust in my system that I had enough
Mhm.
clients coming in that I could sustain this. So
Yeah.
is that the recommendation? You need to have X number of like expenses saved before you're, I'm very risk tolerant. Like I'm not averse to risk. So I just went for it. But like for the risk
You did.
averse person, what would you recommend they have in savings?
Okay, so if you're a Katie May, go for it because you have this cover, you're gonna make it work, right? But for those of you who are maybe a little bit less risk adverse like myself, I would want you to prepare financially from a cash flow perspective. And this is literally cash you have in your bank account. Because I think this is the other aspect that business owners don't talk about, which is that's what gets you out of business. If you don't have a line of credit or some way to access cash flow when you need it to run payroll, and your people are not hitting the goals, this is going to become a nightmare if you're not having the right accountability in place. And this is why we want to have that runways to cover the gap of potentially things not working out the right way. And then you still being able to have the luxury of time to respond to correct that issue and address it so that you can start to see results and hitting the goals. Also, the other thing I see often happen is we pick the worst time of the year to implement this kind of changes. Like we're going into our slow summer season or our slow holiday season and we want to make everyone hit their goals. And it's like, well, in the past, we've seen that be a struggle. So maybe we wait till we know it's going to be a busy time of year, for your practice. And that might be different depending on your practice, but just be aware of like, when are you the most busy time? Then maybe you align it with that change. I would like everyone to have like 2, 3 months of runway for each person that you're putting on salary ahead of time, because then you're taking on the responsibility. You already had payroll, right? So that should not be a surprise. But now you're taking a different level of accountability, and you just need enough, again, to feel like you can sleep at night, make sure that you feel taken care of as an owner, and that if for some reason people are not hitting their goals, that you have a little bit of that closing the gap temporarily while your team is getting used to that accountability and expectations that are maybe new to them. And this is where we also see, by the way, Katie, a lot of turnover. So I
Yeah.
want to prepare owners
Mhm.
for you might need to like rehire people 3, 6, 9 months after you've implemented this accountability. And I think owners are not ready for that. And we always tell them, just so you know, when we
Yeah.
start talking numbers and accountability, some people choose to opt out. And that is okay because they're probably the people that are not hitting the goals. So you kind of almost are like, well, if this is what's best for you, we're happy to support you. And at the same time, you have a new opportunity to bring someone new with new expectations of this is what we do and we hit this and this is the expectation for that salary.
So I'm glad you said that. I'll tell my accountability story and then my transition to salary, because that's the other piece that I would say. So you need to have a steady stream of clients coming in. You need to have expectations for your therapist and know what those numbers are. And you need to have accountability in place. And I've seen, again, in Stabilize and Scale, I see people say, maybe if we go to salary, people will be hitting their numbers. Like, no, that's the same thing as my teen clients who say, well, when I go to college, I'll care about school. Like, you better care now and demonstrate that you have that ability before you move to the next thing. So
Exactly.
having an accountability structure, and I'll tell you what mine looks like. We have a company dashboard. I use a program called 90.io. You can use a Google Sheet. You can use whatever you'd like to use. It doesn't have to be what I use. But every week at the end of the week, my therapists count out their week and they put all billable hours and their show rate into the dashboard. They enter their numbers rather than me telling them their numbers because I want them personally accountable to their job and to their role. And so that's something we've been doing since 2020, so for a while now. And to your
Mhm.
point, Carla, in the 2 years that we were implementing it, and yes, it took 2 years for therapists to
Mhm.
fully shift their mindset from being commissioned to being on salary to entering their numbers. I had 8 people turnover in my practice.
Mhm.
And it was the people who were saying I was too corporate, that I only cared about numbers. And to that, I will say, well, if I'm being too corporate, it's me matching people's retirement, me giving people health benefits and paying for 75% of it, me putting people on a salary and then working 4-day work weeks. Like it was very much my intention to give balance, but some people felt triggered by the idea of
Mhm.
numbers and tracking, and that's okay. We also prepare people for
Mhm.
when you shine the light of accountability flexibility. Some people don't want it and they self-deselect, like they leave the
Hmm.
company. And that is
Yeah.
okay. So that was all in place prior to me making this decision to go on salary. So I knew people were hitting their numbers and I knew how to hold them accountable to those numbers. We have processes for monthly meetings where we review numbers with therapists. We don't wait until the end of the quarter or the end of the year to say you haven't met this
Hmm.
number. We keep this really regular cadence of meeting to make sure that people are on track or we're supporting them and getting on track. So I
Hmm.
made this decision to go on salary. At the time, I was contracting with an HR consultant. And I'll say, like, in hindsight, I think I was just avoidant of being more managerial. And so I delegated that part out to someone else and somebody who didn't have as close or as strong of a relationship with my team as I had. So I would do it differently next time and I would have those conversations myself, but I was burnout. I was over capacity. I was parenting in a pandemic while being a business owner and a spouse to a business owner. And it was just a lot. So I contracted that out. And so this HR person had these meetings with all of my employees. The metric that I came up with, again, it will be different for you, was that I looked at the projected number of sessions and the projected revenue, and I decided that I was going to pay 46% of 46 weeks of projected numbers because we are a teen practice and we're seasonal for, lack of a better
Hmm.
way of putting it. So summers are very slow. And the risk was now in salary on the business to pay out the employees despite us not having the guarantee that we would have
Hmm.
the clients. And so that base salary, and I can talk about my bonus in a little bit, that base salary was 46% of 46 weeks of clients. So this was presented to all of my employees. I had someone that I was supervising at the time text me immediately and say they needed to talk to me, and then got on the phone with me and screamed that they will walk if I don't keep them on commission. And they were very upset. And this was a person who moved from another state to come work for my practice, and they were in their first year of working at my practice. So I sat with it and I said, you know what? That's fair. We'll keep you in commission, grandfather you in just for this year while we're figuring out the details. And then behind my back, they were building a practice and left with their clients who are their clients, but a bunch of other things and some ethical things that happen after that. So my point being, don't make decisions based on any one person's feelings or opinion because everyone can leave your practice at any time and you don't want to be bending or making decisions for somebody who is not going to be there for the long haul like you are. And
Hmm.
other people unhappy saying I'm making less money than I was making before, which was technically true, but that's something, Carla, that always bothers me when I see like job ads and it'll say like $98,000 salary, but really it's a commission based offer and it's like, well, that's projected what you can make, but that's not guaranteed what you're going to make. So these are like some of the cons was the emotional
Hmm.
reaction to
Hmm.
switching to salary. They couldn't really understand like, well, like matching, like, well, what about my PTO? What about this? There was just a lot of confusion. And so what I'm trying to say, if there's a raised hand, if you want to put a question in the chat, yeah,
Yeah, I think
we'll
we have
answer
one
that.
question around the
Okay.
46% we'll address here in a minute.
What I'm trying to say is be prepared for the emotional reactions. We
Hmm.
know that money brings up a lot of emotions for people, and you can be as intentional as possible, and you're still going to
Hmm.
get these reactions. It does not mean that you're doing it wrong or that you should change your mind.
Hmm.
Okay, that's
Right.
it was emotional.
And if I may add, not only will they bring their own, but you might feel like you're triggered from your own money stories on like, oh, I'm being unfair or I'm paying people the wrong way or like, oh, am I sure? Like you got to be solid in your decision on how you're moving your company forward so that you don't allow all these doubts to shake you off of your ground,
And
right?
why you're
And so I
doing
think that's
it,
where
right?
you were really like solid on that because we had run the numbers, we felt good about it. We knew where the changes were happening, where there people down or up, or the potential was there for them to earn. And you're right, people get this number. So I'm like, oh, you can earn $98,000, but it requires you to work X number of
Right.
hours, and they don't, and then they make half, and they're not doing the math of, oh,
Yeah.
this position is half, therefore I'm getting paid half, so that's comparable because nobody's doing the math. Like
Right.
I'm telling you, every time we hire, we're like, here's the math, and we even present the math, right? Part-time role, full-time role, like choose, and they still not sure because they're comparing it to hospital jobs that pay more or whatever, but they
Yeah,
require you 40, 60 hours a week, right? Again,
exactly.
nobody's doing the math. So just keep that in mind. And then Katie, we have a question around the
Jessica
46% just
said
being wages. So if you want
46%.
to get to that
Yeah,
next,
so if I did projected revenue. So my therapists are required to see 1,000 direct hours a year. So let's say I can't do math. So
I can
in
help.
those, okay, sure. So let's say 1,000 direct hours per year times $100 per session. That's not correct, but what is that, Carla, if I do that?
Yeah, that's $100,000
Yeah,
for
so
that one
40,
position.
46% of that is what they get paid as a
Yeah, so
base,
46,000. Yeah.
which is significantly less than they actually get paid. That was just an easy math.
That was just an example, math, but it could be 200 and then it's double,
Right.
like, yeah.
So
Hmm.
it's 46%. And then I have a bonus structure on top of that. And Carla, you were really helpful with this too. So my bonus structure, I like to give my specifics so it like ignites people's ideas, is if they hit their quarterly target. So 1,000 broken up into 4 quarters is if they hit 250 direct hours in their quarter, they get an extra $1,250. So they have the ability to make 5,000 additional
Extra.
dollars per year
Mhm.
on top of their salary. Not everybody hits it. So they have to hit their target and they can't be late on their notes. Because our
Mm.
quality control was, yes, you could see 1 million clients, but if you're not doing your notes, you're not doing your full job. So you have to hit your
Yeah.
notes and you have to hit your target. And then you get 1250 extra per quarter. And
Yeah.
so that increases their salary even more. And that allows them to be motivated because that piece gets removed. When you move to a salary, you remove that natural like the motivation to I need to hit this income level because I need to pay my bills. That's gone. So that this was another way for me to motivate them to hit their numbers.
Yeah, which is so true because like they're on salary. They can literally not show up to work
Mhm.
and maybe not so much, but
No,
they
that's not
could not
true.
see anyone that week. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
not quite true, but they could not see anyone in a week because they're sick or whatever. They're still gonna get their paycheck. They're
Mhm.
still gonna get paid their salary. So now you're out revenue and you're paying this person, regardless because they're using probably their PTO or sick time or whatever. So you gotta take into account that. That's why Katie chose to go 46% of the revenue potential they could have. Now, this is assuming they're hitting their goal again, right? Going back to if your team is underperforming, this doesn't work because now you don't have 46% of the revenue they're generating. You have less because they maybe generated less than you had expected. So you got to be careful on managing that accountability because that's where, you're going to drive the revenue goals that you're looking for from each person. And every person that doesn't hit their goals, it compounds. And that's the thing that people don't understand is when you have 10, 15, 20 therapists in your practice, maybe 40, like the numbers add up and the
Yeah.
profits can be huge loss because you have just a compounded effect with every visit that doesn't happen, every note that doesn't get submitted so that we can build the insurance accordingly. Like those are things that matter, right?
Yeah. Jessica, to clarify your question, the 46% is not including payroll taxes and benefits. So they're on top of that. So if we're really looking at my full number of what's going out to employees, if we're including payroll taxes and benefits, it's probably closer to like 52% because I'm giving retirement, we give PTO, we do health benefits. So that was kind of my way of protecting myself, but it is closer to probably 50 to 52% with all those things included.
Yeah, and we did the math on all those extra aspects, right? Because some practices have senior reimbursements, wellness stipends, things like that, 401k match, like you mentioned. And that's where we want to make sure we're clear on the math to ensure that we are accurately calculating what are our real costs and times the number of therapists, times the sessions, the average reimbursement rate, which is also important because I see that sometimes changes over time too, Katie. And we need to reevaluate the numbers to make sure that it still makes financial sense to have this compensation structure over time as well, right? We're always evaluating. And as long as we're seeing profit, we know we're on the right track. But if profit starts to shrink as a percentage of revenue every year, we need to go address and figure out what's happening on the average reimbursement rate, maybe, or some other metric that's not working out, especially if the team again is not hitting the goals. I think we have a question on how to prevent them from doing the just skip a week of seeing
Yeah.
clients and then all of a sudden your numbers are off.
So I have answered, and then I want to hear from you about it. I'm private pay, so I think you can speak to the insurance a little bit more. But in
Yes.
terms of Michelle, your question, how to prevent them from doing that, not seeing clients. Number one, my therapists are invested in seeing their clients because they care about the client outcomes. And so I think that's right person in the right seat doesn't just not see their clients. That's outside of just numbers in general. We have a set amount of time off that our therapists can take. So it comes out to roughly 4 weeks per year, 3 weeks PTO, plus a bunch of paid holidays. And I've done the math to ensure that they can hit their numbers with the amount of time off that they have. If we see that they're calling out unpaid time off, not seeing clients, that's when we're addressing that with our management strategies. So we're coming in trying to figure out what's happening, if needed, putting them on a performance improvement plan if coaching isn't helping. And ultimately, if somebody's just not seeing clients, they're not right for my company. So that's something that I would like extinguish pretty quickly. I don't like to manage people, micromanage people. So I like people that are really invested in the success of their clients and the company. If somebody has some kind of chronic illness or, something else, I think I'm addressing that differently from like a disability lens than like what we're talking about here. So I think there are nuances, but that's what I would say. Is there anything you would add to that, Carla?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we're going to accommodate what we possibly can accommodate from, an HR perspective, a people lens, right? We
Yeah.
always care about that too. We're not just, here for the profit. Like we care about our people, and the people can tell that, right, from an owner. And so, of course, we'll have exceptions and things that come up. We'll address them with them individually. But this is not 80% of your team doing this. Maybe it's
Yeah.
one person. Maybe it's a couple of people that you're like, okay, I'm going to work with them through a performance, through accommodations for their illness. And maybe it's revisiting the number of sessions they do a week. Maybe it's accommodating for that and saying, okay, you can't hit the goals at 20 with this salary. Maybe we do a reduced schedule for you and then adjust your salary to match that
Yeah.
accordingly. And that's where I think we got to be very honest, in our practices on what we can afford to accommodate and not afford to accommodate. And I think that sometimes we are able to do that exception. Maybe it's temporary, short term, maybe it's more longer term. And then ultimately, you have to know, does this make sense for you and your practice long term? And can you continue to accommodate that, for extenuating circumstances versus like just the occasional one off situation, which we know it happens. We have people. People are going to have situations, right? And we want to be understanding. And at the same time, know, hey, we're running a company, we're running a business. We need to make money to continue to exist and pay everyone too, right? So
Yes.
that's important to balance too.
Sarah, your question, if the revenue
And then there's a
changes for the
question
year,
too.
does their salary go up or down then? Yes. So I'm in the process of this now because we're coming to the end of the year. So here's what this looks like for me is that we have in our informed consent that fees increase by $5 each year. So I've done the math that if a full-time therapist fees increase by $5 across the board, that's an additional $4,000 of revenue that's coming into the practice. Therapists get half of that. They get a $2,000 raise in their salary. Now, here's the caveat. Let's say, so we have 1,000 direct hours is our expectation. Let's say someone comes in at 850 direct hours instead of 1,000, they're only getting 85% of that $2,000. So, once they're in, we start everyone on a standard salary that's the same because I believe in equity. And I think that you shouldn't necessarily get more just because you had the confidence to negotiate and ask for more. I just think that's kind of icky. But once you're in the door, your performance is absolutely informing how you are getting raises in the future. So if you don't hit your number, you don't get your full raise. And that's just how we work it at my practice. And that helps us to recoup some of the money from what they didn't bring in the previous year because they didn't hit that number.
Yeah, and I haven't seen private practices have their revenue go down per se, unless it's like number of therapists or number of sessions being down, which is a different problem, right? So like let's not address that. But on insurance-based practices, to
Yes.
speak to that, Katie, we do see sometimes reductions. We sometimes see we're not getting the full reimbursement rate we expected. And this is like a billing issue as much as it is maybe something we need to address longer term on a salary compensation. But what we do is we first look at the data, analyze, okay, where are we at from a profit perspective, from a margin by clinician perspective, has our average reimbursement rate changed? And is it artificial or real? Meaning, maybe your billing team got behind on filing claims and it created an outstanding balance larger than you expected. That is not your rate going down.
Yeah.
That is, you just haven't collected on everything. Therefore, your rate looks worse than it actually is. So that's a different problem. So don't go cutting everyone's salary because you didn't collect what you should, because that's on you as practice owner to figure out with your billing team. So that's a different problem. But if you're getting a letter of decrease from the insurance, it might just be one, it might not be all of them. So then you have choices. The choices you can make is maybe certain clinicians don't take that insurance. Maybe you decide to shift away from that insurance paneling completely, assuming it's not your biggest and largest. Again, this is where we go back to the data. It's like, what is the impact? Let's calculate that impact and make decisions based on that data, not just randomly out of, feeling pissed off at the insurance for lowering our rate. But it is real problems, and we should address them and make sure that we go do the math and say, okay, if this is going down, what does it mean for my team? Can I still afford to keep the same salary profiles for everyone? Or what changes do we need to make? But just know you're always in control. And I think often I feel like owners think they have no power over making a change. Like, well, I'm stuck with the salaries, I'm stuck with insurance decrease, and then, oh, poor me, and I can't make profit, right? And it's like, no, there's things we can do, and the big decisions and hard decisions sometimes that we have to make in our practice. Also, the other piece to this is with every new hire, you get an opportunity to adjust as well. And I know, Katie, you're about equity and fairness, but sometimes if the insurance is lowering your rate, there's not much you can do.
Oh,
You might have to reassess
absolutely.
salaries,
Yeah.
right? It might be like a small difference, but still, like, you could have an opportunity to correct. And this is what we do with compensation strategies: is we don't just take everyone and flip it over like Katie did, because that's super risky. Like you heard, churn and stuff. What we tend to do is we shift over time with every new hire. We try to do the new structure and then grandfather people in here to make them feel comfortable. And then that's another approach you can take that's a little bit more tempered, but it will take longer. And you might not see the results you want and the outcomes right away, but it is another way that you can over time shift over and maybe potentially protect yourself from some churn while you find the right people that are invested in your model, that care about accountability and know that you got to hit the expectations.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people that really do appreciate, like I said, coming into a practice that's salary based. There's a few questions that I have. So, like myself and my office manager, I have one full-time admin and we're both on salary, but I look at that more as like a business expense than put into this projected revenue. Can you speak to like where,
Yes.
because I know lots of people say like, well, how do I shift my leadership to salary? Or like, how about just my admin? Can you speak to where in the budget those things go rather than the
Yes.
therapists?
Great clarification, because I see people putting them in the wrong buckets and it,
Yeah.
it behaves differently, right? So, like, great question on when we're looking at the P&L, there's four categories I think of. There's like your revenue, there's your cost of services, which is really your clinician wages to perform and achieve the revenue you have. And some people use it, some people don't. We like to split kind of clinical wages out from people like the owner or the admin leadership team, or if your clinical director is clinical, then we'll probably keep them in the clinical wages. If your practice manager is a cost, they're going to be an operating expense.
Yeah.
And it's the expense line. Why? Because one day we want the owner to not have to work to make a living from their business, or choose how they want to work and what hours they want to
I like
put
that
in,
better.
right?
Choose how they want to work. You're like, not
Choose.
work. Oh my God, what will I do?
Yeah,
No,
you're like,
no.
what would I do all day? Choose to work as little as much, to grow, help their team, whatever role they want to play in their practice. And there will be a practice manager role at some point, or some kind of operational role. And these are not people seeing clients producing clinical revenue for you. Therefore, they become what we call overhead, which is just an expense, right? That is not directly tied to generating revenue, in the sense that they're not seeing clients, they're not performing the service directly impacting revenue. So we want to account for that down there, because we have a cap on how much overhead or admin costs we can put on the team. And this includes your biller, this includes your intake coordinators, your practice manager, you as an owner. And we split that out from clinical wages, because now we're trying to understand what is our gross margin
Hmm.
on each clinical staff performing their duties after we compensate them versus the revenue we're taking in. So the formula for that is revenue minus clinical wages for people seeing clients. And then you subtract that, and then you divide that by revenue to get your percentage of gross margin. Now we want your percentage of our gross margin to be healthy, and we aim it to be no less than 40%, ideally 50, 60%, because that gives you enough room to cover your overhead and still have room for profit, which we want to target profit somewhere between 10 and 20% for your practice. No matter, if you're growing and scaling, that might shift because you're investing more in growth. So,
Yeah.
but once you stabilize, which is what Katie is really good at doing, and you pick your favorite size of practice that you want to stay at, now we're really focused on that profit percentage being as high as possible while still, attainable. Because, people can want 50% profit, but that's not going to happen in that service-based business. So like you have to, for depending on the size of business, unless you're solo, then that's a different conversation. So
Right. And I have for me, I know what number I need to hit every month to cover my operating expenses and cover my therapist salary. So this is like my bottom line number. If I hit this, I look at my simple practice projected revenue for the month. I do some math for knowing that some people will cancel. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to clear my expenses and I'm going to make a profit. Or in July, we're always in the red, but I save for that in the other months. So as a year, we're
yeah.
we're still good. So knowing your numbers is really important. Carla, you had some slides. I'm mindful that we're coming up on 40 minutes. So are there things on your slides that you think would be relevant to share?
Yeah, we can bring them up and just see if there's any questions that come up with that. And let me make this full screen. Hopefully you guys can see. And then I might not be able to see the chat. So just let me know if there's
I'll
any questions
monitor the
there.
chat for you.
Okay, so these are a few of the things we talked about, right? Capacity and utilization are critical because I think this is where a lot of people are not hitting their goals, and this is where you can see that your profit's going to leak out of the practice. But Katie already talked about accountability. She talked about how you track, how you keep your team on track, how they need to be exceeding the target, not just trying to hit it because that's how they're going to be able to hit it. And then we need to be measuring this on a weekly basis. We need awareness. I think often this is not communicated to the teams, and then this starts to happen, and this is the problem because you're not hitting the goal, therefore that's where your profit is going to be leaving your practice. And want to make sure you get as tight as possible there, because when we did projections, right, Katie, and you can kind of walk people through like your perspective on that, but we projected on the weekly goal, and then we know that if we run the numbers with the actuals that are happening here, we would have a problem. We would not be able to afford all the salaries. We would not be able to afford the rent or even the owner's compensation or some other aspect, or maybe we just wouldn't have profit. So this is where it really makes a big difference, because if your projections are based on these goals and your team are not hitting again, you're going to have a gap no matter what you want to call it. Like it's going to be a problem.
So the accountability is super important. Knowing your numbers, but then knowing how to hold your team accountable to those numbers is going to be so important if you're moving to this model.
Exactly. So that's one aspect of it. And then the other piece of it that I mentioned, gross margins, it might feel a little daunting to go and calculate this for your whole team, especially if you have like, more than 10 people. You're like, oh, that's a lot of spreadsheet work. And I just want to give you like a walkthrough on how that works. And I think we're getting some questions around total compensation. And we do look at total compensation. That means not just the salary, not just the taxes, but any benefits you pay for, making sure that you have comprehend all the cost that goes out the door for any given employee. And I think this is where people go wrong, where they just look at, well, I just have the salary and then we're good. And then they forget there's all this extra expense that comes with having an employee that is not surprising, but somehow we forget all the benefits and things that they could take advantage of. And you mentioned like the profit sharing piece. There's different ways to do that, but that is a component that we want to account for, because that means for every time that we're profitable, we also need this extra expense to be accounted for after profit is generated as a result. And obviously, we're happy to pay that because that means we got the profit we needed to be able to give people back. And they feel like they're in a win win situation because they're getting a piece of the pie, right? Like when the owner wins, I win kind of
Yeah.
attitude. And they love that because they want to be part of the success of the practice. They don't want it to just be like, oh, the owner gets rich, sips margaritas by the beach, which never happens, by the way. But that's what everybody thinks, right?
So I
Um,
know for me, like I just did the math yesterday, I'll be paying out about $20,000 in bonuses at the end of this year, which I'm so thrilled about. I
how
mean, it's a
exciting.
huge chunk of change going out the door, but like it is people who have done their job and who have earned it. And I have people that have been on my team for 8 years. Yes, we had turnover, but we have people that know the value of what we're doing and are invested in it. And so therefore I'm invested in them. So I think that's important
Mm.
also when we're thinking about like investing in the people that work for us. It's also investing in not having to offboard and onboard or train up new people. Like there are benefits for me that come with that as well.
Exactly. And that's important. So, like, going back to the math piece here to make sure that all is possible in your practice. And like, how great to be able to reward people for their great work at the end
Yeah.
of the year, quarter, whatever your cadence is. And we actually try to match bonus payouts to as soon as possible. Like, we don't want a lot of admin work, so we're not going to do it monthly, but quarterly is good because it reminds them that, hey, you are consistently hitting your goals, therefore you get this extra money. Thank you. And we appreciate you, and they enjoy that aspect of it. But how you calculate even just the revenue, you're going back to my previous one, is you take that average reimbursement rate from insurance or private pay, number of sessions that they committed to by clinician, and then you do the math to come up with this revenue number. Once you have that, you match the total compensation for that person's salary, benefits, payroll tax, everything, and then you do the math subtracting from the revenue, you subtract the cost to come up with what is the gross margin number, and then this gross number margin gets divided by revenue to come up with your percentage. We want to make sure everybody has a healthy percentage, not just one person, not 80% of the team. Like, everyone has to have a good. And then we also look at overall practice, because you might have some roles that are, maybe not in your case, Katie, but maybe some people have psychologists or more experienced people that they're paying top dollar for, that gets the prestige of the practice, that gets the pull into the practice that they need. Maybe there's some APRNs they're paying for. Those tend to be higher, right? So just know that your margins might be lower on them, but you're going to make it up with, maybe you have interns on the other side or associates that you're able to get a much healthier margin because they're just starting in early in their career. They still don't have the experience, and you pay them differently. And so that overall combined gives you an overall practice gross margin. And that's what you're seeing kind of here, like the intern kind of situation where sometimes you don't have to pay them. Maybe you choose to pay them, that's fine. And overall, as a practice, you want to see a healthy average that you're managing to make sure you can cover all your expenses as well.
So I'm glad that you mentioned like interns and associates because there's a question in the chat. Would you still recommend salaries for clinicians who are still in residency and could possibly leave once their hours are met? I know for me, so we don't pay our interns. They get a lot of paid trainings and they leave with a career, honestly. But we do have pre-licensed therapists who work for 2 years towards licensure. We have one that just left to follow her dream of doing something that she could not do at our practice, and she took all her clients with her. But we pay everyone on a salary. Again, benefit for me of the administrative piece, but also I don't know how to do it otherwise now in terms of controlling costs. So our pre-licensed therapists, if I had to do, rough math, are getting like 37 to 40% of the revenue that's coming into the practice, but they're also getting paid for supervision. They're getting all of their paid training. So they are getting a lower salary than our licensed therapists. And anyone could leave at any time, not just when their hours are
Mhm.
met. So you really need to decide for you what is the best structure that's going to work for your company. And then it wouldn't be contingent for me upon like where they are in their career, because again, anyone can leave at any time.
Yeah, I mean, we've done hourly models for that too. We just don't shy away from split percentage. It just, it's a different model. We don't really see a lot of benefit in that. Personally, we've worked with a lot of clients that have some of that. Some do it well, and some maybe struggle with that model. So, like I say, there's a little bit of everything for everyone, like commission, hourly, or salary. You have to choose what it is, but I want you to stay consistent. And
Yeah.
when you have too many models, what it brings complexity, and it brings people to ask questions because they're not sure how they're getting compensated. And that opens the door to them asking for more money, for feeling like they're getting underpaid, like they're going to start exploring other opportunities. And like, you want people to feel like you're invested in them and they're compensated well in the way that you can, as your practice grows. And like Katie said, we're revisiting salaries every year no matter what, because we want to know, can we afford an increase, based on performance, and make sure that people feel like they're keeping up, with just even inflation or cost of living, and be mindful of that, right? And that's easier to be done in a private pay setting. In an insurance space, it's harder because
Yeah.
you are not in control of your rate, right? So you have to figure out what else are you going to do to cover that extra increased cost. And that's why we run the numbers again.
What other questions are coming in? I don't know if Carla has other slides, but we're coming down to our last like 5, 7 minutes, and I want to make sure. I mean, we're not pitching anything here. This was really just for
No,
us
this is pure
back.
information.
So whatever questions you have, we want to make sure that we can answer them before we wrap up. Did you have any other slides, Carla?
No, just had my
Okay.
info on the end in case people wanted to reach out. But otherwise, we're keeping the math light today. But, just know this is all in spreadsheets. Like Katie can attest, like our work is pretty thorough, and like how we go about doing the math because we understand there's a lot of moving pieces. And this is why we wanted to bring it together for you to understand how it all comes together. Because it's not as simple like, okay, just, a few things, calculate. No, it's like it is complicated because there's so many pieces. But we're hoping to streamline it through this conversation so you can understand like the flow of it and how it all works together and comes together for your practice too. So you can implement it right away on your own. Or, if you need help, of course, we're happy to help.
There's some questions coming in, which is great. Michelle says, what are your thoughts on not offering salary until someone has been with you X number of years versus right up front? I know some practices will do like hourly until your caseload is full. It sounds like, Carla, what you were recommending is maybe we switch people a little bit at a time. So maybe what Michelle is saying makes sense with that, like titrating over time.
Yeah, just again, going back to how you want to manage your compensation strategies and structure, because there is going to be then variability, right? On how many hours are you paying people for? Now you're going to do more math, it's more admin work. So it's up to you to decide what's right for your practice. I think that no one model is right for every single practice. I think every practice has their culture to account for. They have like their people to think about and like how they want to be seen as the employer of choice. And that might vary by state, by location, by type of practice. And I think it's evaluating what model could work for you before you make that decision. It's going to be key so you can run the numbers and make sure you feel confident in that. And yeah, I've seen practices that do hourly first, caseload full, they maybe convert to employee salary. And they maybe have their leadership team on salary already. So there's some, different ways that you can approach it.
Nicole asks, do you have a ballpark salary number for your admin staff? I think I want to shift the question because that's going to be so different based on geographic location and what you're offering. So I'm going to shift it to Carla. Is there a recommended percentage of revenue that should go to admin staff?
So yeah, there's some ratios we can look at, but I think it depends on your practice size too. Because, I can say like put this much towards admin costs, but your practice might not be able to yet cover that kind of admin support. And you might be able to only afford part-time versus like full-time 40 hours. And you might not have the workload for that too. So it's another thing we're evaluating for, right? And it's hard to say, oh, it's this one given percentage, because we also take into account owners' compensation, how much work the owners do, and how's that shifting over time to see where we can afford to do that. But I always say like the admin work should grow with the size of practice. So you don't want to have too many admin positions. Like what I see often is we have like two two intake people, one practice manager, and then we have extra people doing whatever kind of admin work for a practice that's just not the size of complexity yet to
I
have
don't
that many roles.
understand that. So I see a lot of practices that have so many admin. I have 20 therapists, give or take, and I have one full-time admin and one part-time VA that works like 5 hours a month. And I think it comes down to your systems. How have you streamlined your systems to make things work rather than just like continuing to add people because your current people aren't as efficient as they should be?
Yeah, we call it human glue because we know it's like someone's holding together processes because you don't have them, or something is like there's a gap in efficiency there that could be addressed through, standard operating procedures or systems that are lacking. So it's looking at that first before you add people power to it, and then bring people that can maybe help you identify where are some of those gaps. So you don't need so many people on the admin side. Obviously, insurance-based practices are going to be heavier on the biller side just because there's a lot more that goes
Right,
into
right.
that. It's more complicated. But yeah, we have practices that sometimes just have the wrong profile on admin, and we can tell because it's dragging down our profitability of the practice, and then they're wondering why they're not making money. And when we bring it up and say, hey, there's a lot of admin stuff, they're very hesitant to want to change. And so it's hard to be like, because they're like, if you take this one person, it all falls apart. And it's like, whoa, we have a problem.
Right.
It's a different problem we need to address. Because, if Katie has 20 people and she only has one admin person, why can't you, same size of practice, do the same? So we were asking questions to address. This way, it really depends on the practice and what workload is getting put on the plate versus what's being automated or handled more efficiently through systems. And I think Katie has a great, robust set of systems that she runs her practice on. So if you need some of that, I'm sure she'd be happy to share.
So a couple other things in here. And then Carla, go ahead and put your slide up so people know how to connect with you. But Jenny says, Katie, will we go over reports and numbers more in Stabilize and Scale? So I'm going to answer that comprehensively right now. Yes, we go through exactly how to set up your dashboard, exactly how to hold your team accountable, exactly what to say and do in meetings to make sure that they are accountable, how it all connects to your vision, projecting out to the future. So we do all of the systems, all of the data, everything that you need to know is within Stabilize and Scale, the group practice program that I co-run, which moves us down to our next comment. Mara, you'd love to consult. I consult within the group practice program that I run. So I put the link grouppracticescale.com in the chat. If you want to go ahead and fill out a form, then I can reach out to you from there. But because I am at capacity, I don't do one-on-one consulting, but I do through that program. There are other members of the program that are here that can speak to what it's like in the chat if you want to. But that's how I consult with people. Dave, this is a question for you, Carla. Is it necessary to create budgets for departments in your organization if you don't have one already?
Yeah, so we approach the budgeting process for a holistic approach, so all practice, all costs, inclusive of everything. And then we are able to delegate some of the responsibility of each department and their management budget line to the staff in charge of it. So, like, for example, we'll create department budgets for maybe the marketing team, and there's someone in charge of marketing that will handle the spending on that to the budget we have created with a strategic plan and direction on how you're going to achieve the intended outcomes. And here is the budget that goes along to support that. That's just one example. We have a training department that gets a budget. Same thing. What are the outcomes, expectations? What is the return or value that we're going to get for this budget investment? And then we track that, in metrics and obviously key performance indicators or ways that we know we're getting the benefit for that. And if something's not working, we're also revisiting to make sure we're changing the strategy. We don't change the budget always. We revisit it quarterly even if we don't change it, because we need to make sure we're on track of track. We're looking at that monthly. We're deciding if we're going to make changes to the budget quarterly going forward, because we're always looking forward. We're not just looking at present and past. Present and past is great for performance to see are we on track, off track, but where you want to adjust is going forward to make sure you are achieving the goals and getting back on track if you're not. And that's where it's a twofold approach, right? Check on your performance and then also make sure you're looking forward to adjust anything that you need to ensure that you have the right goals, because things change. And this is the thing that I don't think is talked about often, Katie. Like, we create a budget and that's great. And if everything's going well, awesome. You still need to be checking monthly, and you still need to update your goals quarterly if things have changed. You hire 5 new clinicians, your goals are going to be different. So that's a starting point. Your budget was a starting point, but now as we are growing and maybe it wasn't our hiring plan to hire 5, then that's already accounted for in your budget. Fantastic. You don't need to make changes, but it still have to be revisiting every quarter to make sure that's still the plan. Oh, we can't hear you now, Katie. So we're going to give you a minute there.
Can
Okay,
you
we
hear
have a
me now?
question. Yes, we're
Okay.
good. And then David asked a question on how do you find yourself being flexible with some of your policies to attract and retain your clinicians?
Yeah, I am not super flexible. I am flexible because like we're human, but for me, I need things to run efficiently and I need things to be streamlined, and the systems are there for a reason. And typically, if someone is not vibing with my systems, then they're not right for my business. Of course, if they need accommodations, and 80% of our team is neurodivergent, so we have like accommodations and other things in place, but in terms of being flexible with policies, I'm not, because they're the policies that run my practice, and I can't operate on chaos. My brain is already chaos. I can't have it in my surroundings. And
You know
Laura,
what it does?
go ahead.
I think what it does too is like you're managing your practice from a numbers perspective, which is very like black or white. It's like, did we do or did we not? Did we hit the goal or we did not? Versus like a lot of the emotions, right? Like, I know people have feelings and things will come up. People will ask you for raises. Like, this happens all the time. And you're operating from like your solid ground on like, well, the data says this is what we can afford and the data says this, and you could choose to make exceptions, but I find that every time people start to make exceptions, it's like exception after exception after exception, and then they end up wondering why they don't have profit. And it's like, well, every decision you made contributing to getting you to this place where you're now not profitable anymore. Now we have to backtrack or undo, which is way
Right,
harder. So if
right.
you could stick to your policies, use your numbers to control, your decision making, it helps you be a little less emotional, obviously we care about people. So like
Yeah.
there's always that lens. But we can't accommodate everything for everyone. And that's where you get to decide, right? It's like how much profit are you willing to invest in that one person, that one exception? And like again, it adds up. So just make sure you're doing the math on that.
Well, so it's very wise mind, right? Like I run my company on the data, but I consider each person that's in front of me and I synthesize that information. But to your point about asking for raises, I just saw this come up on my Facebook memories the other day about like offering people a position, they accepted the salary, and then within 3 months we're asking for a raise. And I'm like, you agreed to this less than 3 months ago. You can't tell me, well, you can tell me, but now you're saying this isn't going to work for you. So in my practice, we don't, I have it in my handbook or whatever, like we don't consider mid-year raises. Raises are done annually and you can see them on January 1st. And so I put policies in place to manage my stress. And that is why, as a practice owner, 8 years in, I have minimal stress. Thankfully, because I've had a lot of family child challenges to attend to this year. And I found myself saying very frequently, I'm so glad there are no fires to put out in my practice because I got a lot of home fires to put out this year. And so running streamlined, not making exceptions for everybody, having the right policies, basing your decisions on the data, they're all ways that I have found peace in being a practice owner rather than wanting to burn it all down.
Yeah, and I'll add some perspective because we do look at market research data around salaries for the location you're in, for the positions you have, and we compare to what we're paying people to make sure we're keeping up with the market. And sometimes we're not able to keep up with the market. So this is where you have to decide how you're going to market the job to be the benefits around flexible. Maybe it's a hybrid role. Maybe it's all telehealth as a benefit. Maybe it's less than a full-time schedule so you can attend to your life needs. And this is where we have to highlight the benefits of working here that's different from getting like a different job with a full-time salary with full-time hours that maybe people don't are they're not looking for that and they want something different and they want to
Yeah.
work for you because you give them that flexibility and benefit.
Well, thank you, Carla, for being here. David says valuable information. I agree. I appreciate your input. There will be a recording. I will send it out, but we're at the hour, so I'm gonna say goodbye and let everyone go. And I really appreciate you, Carla. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Bye, everyone.